1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind each year in England and the US, with many notable figures opening up about mental health and broadening the discussion. Just how well is it portrayed in the media and entertainment industries? Do films represent these struggles well, or do they deviate from reality? Most mentally ill characters are portrayed in a negative light, never receiving good, if at all any treatment for their problems. In The Psychopathology of Cinema, Lauren Beecham notes 1 in 4 mentally ill characters kill someone, and half of them inflict harm on another person. The stigma that mentally ill people are violent and dangerous is consistently reinforced in films for the sole purpose of an enticing narrative, which doesn't offer any sense of closure or clarity shed on the characters' mental problems.
I hadn't slept in 4 days.
In Fight Club, the insomniac narrator meets Tyler Durden, and the two form the titular Fight Club, which the narrator believes helps him to sleep. However, Tyler goes on to create an anarchist group, much to the narrator's dismay, although, spoiler alert,
because we're the same person.
That's right.
we learn that the narrator suffers from what appears to be dissociative identity disorder, and all the violent terrorist actions were actually him when he believed himself to be asleep. He faces no known repercussions and watches as the chaos ensues. Dissociative identity disorder is also a very rare illness, which is arguably overrepresented in cinema, especially when used as the violent centre of the narrative. Another disorder often portrayed in films is psychopathy. Various films surrounding the topic are often dramatised at the expense of accuracy in order to create an enthralling story, usually depicting a psychopathic character driven by violence and often murder. Nightcrawler is a good example of this, as we watch the main character Lou, a charming and manipulative video journalist, who commits crimes more inconspicuously, allowing him to evade any form of punishment, and he's even rewarded with his own news show. In Todd Phillips' Joker, Arthur Fleck suffers from pseudobulbar effect, a condition which makes him laugh uncontrollably, as well as seemingly depression, psychosis, and possibly other disorders. He seeks help but is constantly ridiculed and beaten down by those around him. Eventually, he decides to forsake getting better as he believes there's no help for him, and goes on a murderous spree. The film began with a slightly less villainised approach to mental health, but just like many others, and also arguably seeing as his character is adapted from a DC comic book, it eventually reinforces the fatalist mentality that mental problems can't be fixed. He's seen dancing down the stairs, in a parallel shot of him earlier in the film, struggling uphill. At this point, Arthur gladly accepts that society will treat him lowly no matter how hard he tries. The stairs almost symbolise the challenging battle of trying to better oneself in comparison to the easy action of letting go and ascending into madness. In We Need to Talk About Kevin, the titular character is documented growing up with a strained relationship with his mother and demonstrates psychopathic tendencies all throughout his childhood. In one final attempt to spite her, he commits mass murder at his school and is arrested for the massacre, although when asked by his mother why he did it,
I used to think I knew. Now I'm not so sure.
though we never see Kevin seek or receive any psychological help, the film does at least point the viewer to the warning signs of childhood psychopathy, and Kevin's lack of empathy or remorse is a somewhat realistic depiction of the eerie reality of many real-life psychopaths and murderers, or at least generally more realistic than most films. There's no denying the influence cinema has on real people, and arguably these negative depictions of mental health don't help anybody. Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers has been linked to the Columbine High School massacre after the killers named their planned murder after the film. Similarly, a recent subway attack in Japan eerily mirrors the subway murders in Joker, and the attacker also sported a Joker mask. These are just a few instances where mentally ill narratives are taken all too literally. Lauren Beecham found that half of mental health service users say that movie representations impact their own mental health. Now, of course, it's not down to filmmakers to monitor their impact on people who may suffer from diagnoses in their films, and it's easy to understand that for the most part these fictitious stories are just used for entertainment purposes. However, the reinforcing of the stigma that mentally ill people are all crazy and there's no help for them is something that needs rectifying, as disorders like sociopathy, antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy and various others are at the end of the day real-life disorders, and not everyone that has them turns out to be violent or a serial killer. Instead, filmmakers should seek more realistic representation if they're going to use real disorders and break away from the negative preconceptions that films greatly help to enhance.